Philosophy begins in wonder, says Aristotle. Hello, good evening, and welcome to a new episode of Arguably the Reading Quest. I am Nishant. So in this video, I'm going to talk about 13 most important Greek philosophers before Socrates. They're known as Pre-Socratic philosophers. When it comes to the classical Greek tradition, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were by far the most important Greek philosophers commonly associated with the Greek classical period. However, before Socrates, there were a series of earlier thinkers who laid the foundation of Western philosophy and eventually Western science. So in this video, I am going to speak on 13 most important Greek philosophers before Socrates. So please watch the video till end. I'll be largely addressing you through this video, but I'll be largely reading it out through this document that I prepared so that I may not miss on some of the most important point that I believe is indispensable for the video. So the pre-Socratic were the first philosophers of the Greek canon and produced a variety of theories that try to explain the nature of the universe, the nature and the foundation of universe. So if I have to distinguish between the post-Socratic and the Socratic tradition versus the pre-Socratic tradition, please understand that pre-Socratic, as the term literally means before Socrates, were largely distinguished by their quest in order to find the origin and the nature of universe, the nature of ultimate reality, where Socrates was largely a philosopher that was concerned with the ethical and the moral problems of his time. Also, many pre-Socratic themselves were contemporary of Socrates, so we shall see it in the video later on. So, the term pre-Socratic was coined in the 18th century by scholars interested in Greek philosophy. However, it was popularized by Hermann Diels in the 19th century. Diels used this term to underline the difference between these thinkers that he believed were interested in natural phenomena and Socrates, who was largely interested in moral philosophy. Nevertheless, the pre-Socratics were also interested in moral problem and political problem. And although the term literally means before Socrates, but most of them were the contemporary of Socrates. And one thing that is very interesting, and I find it as curious, is that what unites all these pre-Socratic is that all the works of all the pre-Socratic is lost. In contrast to Aristotle and Plato, who were lucky enough to have large part of their work preserved, the works of pre-Socratic are largely known by the fragments of their work surviving in the work of the later author, like Socrates and like Plato and Aristotle. So their works are lost. So in this video, I'm going to speak on 13 most important pre-Socratic philosopher, and let's start with the Milesian school. And a name that immediately comes to our mind when we talk of the first philosopher. The first philosopher was Thales, Thales of Miletus, pronounced as Thales. So, Thales was interested in natural philosophy, undoubtedly. Aristotle considered Thales to be the first philosopher in the Greek tradition and consequently of the Western canon. And the Milesian was additionally included among the 7 sages of ancient Greece. So Thales was one of the 7 sages. Thales came up with a system where water was the origin of all the matter. In addition, he famously predicted the solar eclipse of 585 BC and introduced geometry from Egypt to Greece as well as other inventions. Thales also calculated the height of Egyptian pyramids and the distance of ships from the shore using geometry. He is also attributed with developing the Thales theorem. However, Thales' predicted eclipse was largely a myth because in order to predict eclipse, you must know that the heavenly bodies and the planets are spherical, whereas at the time of Thales, it was not known that heavens were the planetary bodies are spherical. That is why it is a myth, and the myth is prominently discussed in W.C.H. Guthrie's book, The Pre-Socratic Philosophers. but let it be. So Thales was not just a philosopher, but an individual seeking knowledge from every corner he could get. Now the next and the second one is Anaximander of Miletus. Also active in the city of Miletus, Anaximander was a student, a disciple of Thales. Anaximander was the first philosopher also to write a book, please know. Like Thales, he was also interested in many different areas. And he is attributed with the invention of gnomon, although that is highly unlikely. Anaximander was also thought to be the first to draw a map of the known world, so he was also the first cartographer. He disagreed with his teachers regarding the basic nature, basic substance of the universe. So while Thales believed that the basic substance was water, everything came out of water, Anaximander attributed everything to apeiron. Apeiron means the infinite. So this was an abstract entity that gave birth to everything and was the place where all things will eventually return. Apeiron. Anaximander was also the first to use the term arc. Arc means beginning, it also means chief, for example, in the word archaeology or architecture. So arc means the beginning in a philosophical context. Additionally, he also speculated that animals and humans evolved out of other animals that live in water and believed in the existence of multiple worlds. The third philosopher is Anaximenes, again of Miletus. Anaximenes was the third Milesian among the Greek philosophers before Socrates. He was a student of Anaximander, and he was also a monist. Monist means a person who believes that the ultimate reality or the primal substance is one. There's no non-dualism. There's just one primal substance. So whereas Thales saw water, Anaximander saw the apeiron, Anaximenes saw air, which he thought was the arc, which means the beginning of all things. Anaximenes. Now come to the most important name of the pre-Socratic period, that is Heraclitus of Ephesus. Heraclitus was born in Ephesus of Asia Minor, where he produced a philosophy of change. He believed that the world is in a constant flux, the world is always evolving, and the world is always moving, and it is made of fire, not water, fire. Although his quote on water is very famous, that you cannot step into the same river twice, for you are not the same man and river is not the same river. For fresh waters are ever flowing upon you. We step and do not step into the same river. We are and we are not. That is again a very important philosophy of Heraclitus, because one of the most important philosophies is idea of the unity of opposites. This meant that for Heraclitus, opposite like good and bad, being and non-being, night and day, up and down were in fact one. Not one as indiscernible, but as a way that coin has two different sides, but it is nonetheless one coin itself. So he was also the first philosopher to talk about logos. Logos means form or symbol or idea. In modern sense, it also means study. For example, sociology, biology, archaeology, and all such things. A term that became extremely popular in the next century and continues to be one of the most central theme of philosophers even today. Heraclitus is said to have left only one work called On Nature and was particularly influential. And he was also known as a weeping philosopher, interestingly, because many of his fragments were pessimistic in nature. He was also the one that was known as the obscure philosopher because of his cryptic sayings. So he was an obscure philosopher because of his cryptic sayings. Plato, Nietzsche, Hegel, Heidegger, and even communist leader Lenin were fans of this Ephesian philosopher. Now the fifth philosopher is Xenophanes of Colophon. Just like other Greek philosophers before Socrates, Xenophane is not our typical philosopher. He was again a poet and a theologian who spoke firmly against the idea of polytheism, and he also criticized, anthropomorphic images of God. Xenophane nonetheless again criticized the theological view of Homer and Hesiod, who painted an immoral image of God who committed theft, adultery, debauchery, war, and more. He also believed that the gods were not like humans and that there was only one non-anthropomorphic deity. Non-anthropomorphic, please note. Xenophane was also amongst the first to talk of the limits of human knowledge. He spoke of the impossibility to understand the truth about God and insisted that knowledge is relative. So he was also one of the first relativists in the history of philosophy. If God has not created yellow honey, people would say that figs were far sweeter. Relativism. Ethiopians have gods with snub nose and black hair. Thracians have God with grey eyes and red hair. But again he says that if oxen and horses and lions had hands or could draw with hands and create work of art like those made by men, horses would draw pictures of God like horses and oxen of gods like oxen. They would make the bodies of their god in accordance with the form that each species itself possesses. Now comes the most important tradition, and that is the Pythagorean tradition. So Pythagoras of Samos is the sixth most important ancient pre-Socratic in our video. Pythagoras of Samos. So he was a philosopher. Pythagoras was born in the Greek island of Samos, and he was an interesting pre-Socratic existing somewhere between myth and history. And he moved to Croton of South Italy to found his own school. Pythagoras is very, very influential, known to have formulated the Pythagoras theorem, that hypotenuse is equal to base square plus perpendicular square. And it is really difficult to talk about Pythagoras. His school was a secret society, and the teaching associated only to those who were initiated into the school. However, we do know that Pythagoras taught an ascetic way of life that demanded dietary restrictions and promoted a spirituality that idealized numbers and math, called numerology. So in many ways, Pythagoras was more like a prophet than a philosopher, and his school was like a monastery. The ascetic life, the communal lifestyle, the obsession with the divine meaning of numbers, and the miracles attributed to Pythagoras are enough proof of that. Aristotle tells us that the people in Croton called Pythagoras Hyperborean Apollo, and that once in Olympia he revealed that his thighs and legs were made out of gold. Aristotle also says that Pythagoreans were thought to have believed in the existence of reincarnation of soul, that is metempsychosis, the reincarnation of soul after death. Legend and a story goes that Pythagoras once saw that a dog was being harassed and beaten up by a fellow citizen at Samoa. And Pythagoras objected because in the beating of the dog, in the mourning of the dog, he identified the voice of his friend, and he saw that his friend has reincarnated as dog. So Pythagoras is also attributed with a series of scientific achievements that could or could not actually be his, like the Pythagoras theorem, the Pythagorean tuning in music, the theory of proportion, the spherical shape of earth, and many more. Now comes the Eleatics. Eleatics are Greek philosophers against movement. Heraclitus was very much for movement. He says that the world is in a constant state of flux and it is becoming and evolving and ever-changing. The seventh philosopher of Eleatic tradition, the Greek philosophers against movement, was the Parmenides of Elea, end of 6th century and the beginning of 5th century. So Parmenides was the founder of Eleatic school and one of the most influential early Greek philosophers. Plato even wrote a dialogue called Parmenides, where it is stated that the young Socrates met Parmenides when Parmenides was 65 years of age at Athens. Parmenides wrote only one book, and only a poem from this work is preserved. So this contains extremely difficult and abstract philosophical ideas regarding the nature of being. These ideas are in complete opposition to the ones founded in the work of the Ionian philosophers. Furthermore, it seems that Greek philosopher Parmenides had serious doubt regarding the possibility of obtaining the truth about the world using our senses. In many ways, Parmenides is the complete opposite of Heraclitus. Where Heraclitus talked of the change and movement, Parmenides insisted on an unchanging, stable universe. While Heraclitus emphasized that the world is becoming, Parmenides held that what exists is the part of one that is timeless, uniform, unchanging, immovable, indestructible, and perfect. Complete opposite to Heraclitus. Now the eighth philosopher and the most important one is Zeno of Elea. Zeno is known for his paradoxes. Not the Zeno of Citium, but the Zeno of Elea, mind it. That which moves neither in the place in which it is, nor in that in which it is not. So Zeno was a student of Parmenides and his successor as a head of the Eleatic school. According to Plato's dialogue, Parmenides, Zeno met young Socrates when he visited Athens with Parmenides to present his book. In antiquity, Zeno became famous for his paradoxes that sought to prove all motion and change were illusions. With these paradoxes, Zeno was trying to prove the ontological theories of his teacher that the world was uniform, unchanging, and immovable. Aristotle discussed these paradoxes in details, offering entertaining insights into Zeno's thought. One of the paradoxes is follow. The first paradox asserts the non-existence of motion on the ground, that which is in locomotion must arrive at the halfway stage before it arrives at the goal. So, since we keep dividing distance in half, the next half and the next half and the next half, it will add up to infinity, and it is not possible to move even one step. So, movement is an illusion as per Zeno. Now come to the Pluralists. The Pluralists were a group of philosophers who believed that the world is composed of more than one primal substance. And the first pluralist and an important one is Empedocles of Protagoras. Empedocles. The pre-Socratic philosopher with the most bizarre stories surrounding his death is without doubt Empedocles of Protagoras. In one story, he disappeared into heaven at night, and in another he leapt into the volcanic crater of Mount Etna. Most probably, none of these stories are true. Inspired by Pythagoreans, Empedocles is almost a prophetic figure. In one story, it is said that he resurrected a woman that had stopped breathing. Of course, these stories tell more of the popular imagination than Empedocles himself. He was influenced by the philosophy of Parmenides nonetheless, and he was the last of the Greek philosophers to express his ideas in verses, in poetic stanzas. Empedocles denounced animal sacrifice and advocated vegetarianism alongside a theory of reincarnation. Now, because he was a pluralist, he thought that there are four elements: fire, air, water, and earth. Everything in existence is a transformation of these four elements. There are two powers, strife and love, that are responsible for the different ratio of each of these elements in things. Strife makes the element withdraw to themselves, while love makes them unite. The 10th philosopher is Anaxagoras of Clazomena. Anaxagoras wrote only one book, and he was mainly influenced by the theories of Parmenides. However, his own theory was a reaction to the Eleatic monism. Monism means there exists just only one primal substance in order to explain the nature of the universe. According to Anaxagoras, in the beginning, everything existed in infinitely small fragments and infinite numbers in such a small place and in such close proximity that they were almost indiscernible. The rearrangement of these fragments was orchestrated by the cosmic mind, which he called Nous, N-O-U-S. Anaxagoras spent a good part of his life teaching in Athens. Like Socrates, he was one of the Greek philosophers to undergo a trial for his ideas. The Athenians blamed him for impiety, probably because of his view that rejected the existence of moon god and the sun gods, lunar and solar deities. Pericles, the Athenian politician, defended Anaxagoras in his trial as the two of them were friends. In the end, Pericles advised Anaxagoras to leave Athens and settle in Lampsacus, where he died. Now come to the Greek philosophers of the atomic theory. And the number 11 is Leucippus of Miletus. Leucippus. So today when we hear of, atomic theory, we either think of Niels Bohr's Rutherford, or we think of atom bomb at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But to our mind, other than nuclear weapon and power plant, atomic theory is much, much, much older. In fact, as old as Leucippus, the first of a series of Greek philosophers who called themselves the atomists. So Leucippus claimed that everything is made of, indivisible thing called atoms, which literally translates as that which cannot be cut. Atom, come from the root word tom. Tom means to cut. Atom, which means something that cannot be cut, something that cannot be further broken down. A core point in his theory is that for movement to be possible, a vacuum needs to exist. In few words, for being to exist, there must be non-being. In many ways, Leucippus continued the naturalistic Ionian philosophy of Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, and Heraclitus. Furthermore, he was the first to claim that things are the way they are because of their nature. And Leucippus established a philosophical school at Abdera, and according to a story, he founded a city of Metapontum. Now the 12th philosopher and a well-known name in atomist is Democritus of Abdera. Democritus says that I would rather discover one cause than gain the kingdom of Persia. Atoms and void alone exist in reality. Democritus was a wealthy citizen who traveled a lot during his life. And very commonly he is listed together with his teacher Leucippus, making it difficult to tell their views apart. He wrote 73 books and led a life avoiding active engagement in politics. However, he did give some public lectures. Democritus visited India, Egypt, Ethiopia and Persia, where it is said that he studied under Ostane, a magus in the court of King Xerxes of Persia. He is also said to have initiated into Pythagoreanism at some point in his life and have briefly studied next to Anaxagoras. Like his teacher, Democritus insisted that matter is made of indivisible parts called atoms that interact mechanically with each other. He also believed that there were atoms of different sizes and shapes. Democritus also valued the intellect as a valid source of knowledge and cautioned against any truth obtained through the senses. He was not into empiricism. We know that he made some contribution to the field of aesthetics, mathematics, anthropology, and other sciences. And like other philosophers, of course, he also believed in the existence of multiple worlds. Democritus became known in antiquity as a laughing philosopher as against Heraclitus, as opposite Heraclitus, who was known as a weeping philosopher because, that was his emphasis on the value of cheerfulness. The last of the philosophers and the philosopher that Socrates despised was the Protagoras, the sophist. The sophists were a group of philosophers that traveled and debated on philosophy and knowledge. And they were experienced in philosophy, and they were usually disliked by Plato. So the 13th and the last, and one of the important one, is Protagoras of Abdera. Protagoras. And Plato also wrote a dialogue called Protagoras. So the sophists were a group of teachers experienced in philosophy who, according to Plato, mainly supported the view that there are no objective truth. Protagoras was one of the most important representatives, contingent of this movement, and a student of Democritus. So Protagoras, the Greek philosopher, debated with Socrates over the nature of virtue. Although Plato was not fond of sophists in general, he presented Protagoras with a high degree of respect. Protagoras believed that for everything there were always two arguments of equal strength. As a result, he was seriously doubting the possibility of obtaining the objective truth. For this reason, Protagoras is considered one of the most important thinkers in the history of relativism. He says that of all the things, the measure is man, of all the things that are, and of all the things that are not, that they are not. Protagoras also took a seemingly agnostic stance on the issue of the existence of gods. He says, about the gods, I am not able to know whether they exist or do not exist, nor what they are like in form. For the factors preventing knowledge are many, the obscurity of the subject and the shortness of human life. Although Plato respected Protagoras, Plato in his dialogue, often with the mouth of Socrates, spoke against sophists and their axiom that there is no single truth. So guys, I hope you have enjoyed the video. I presented 13 Greek philosophers sequentially, chronologically. I hope you have liked the video. If you have still not liked, shared and subscribed my channel, Arguably the Reading Quest, please do that. Happy reading.